Hello everybody, welcome to the video. Today I'll be showing you guys how to move entities with scene graph in UEFN. So here's an example of what you're going to learn. There's going to be a cube that spawns and it's going to move and it's going to grow in size. Obviously there's much more we can do, but this is the basics. Okay, so now to show you how this works. So first you're going to come into your verse and you're going to make a new verse file. I've got this verse file, it's got everything I need, and it's only 93 lines of code with some gaps. So obviously I just have my tags. I think there might be a few extra ones here. Then one of the first things I do when working with scene graph is I'll typically be using temporary spatial math and regular spatial math in the same verse file. So what you do in your project somewhere is you define what it means to have a scene transform or a XYZ, I call it, transform. And that is the temporary spatial math, and then scene graph is the regular spatial math. Just how Fortnite is right now with verse code. So to actually move a entity, you're going to need to make a custom component, and you're going to add this to the prefab. I'm going to show you guys what my prefab looks like here. So I just made a folder for prefabs, and here's my cube. So I'm going to go in here. It comes with a transform component already on it. I added the mesh component, which I decided to just make a cube. And then I added the keyframe movement component because this is what you need to move the object. Now I also added something called a generic movement component, which is the custom component I just made. And this will be controlling the keyframe movement component to move your entity around. So now I'm going to go over a little bit about the start of what this component does. So something I like to do, I like to initialize a variable of keyframes, just an empty array, because if I'm going to be moving this object in a bunch of different ways, it'd be nice to store the keyframes, and then I could set the keyframes equal to this variable later on. Then I define the playback mode. I guess I should call it one-shot playback mode, but I just have it called playback mode. And there's a few different ones, and you need it every time you use keyframe movement. Then I'm going to give myself a variable of maybe KFM, which means maybe keyframe movement. You have to initialize it to false. And then I'm also going to initialize the easing function, which I normally just use the linear easing function. But you can look into easing functions if you want to use different ones. And then on begin simulation, I'm going to write if KFM equals entity.getComponent. So what I'm doing is if the entity has a component called keyframe movement component, I'm going to set my maybe KFM equal to an option of this component. So now I don't have to look for the component every time. I just have to write this next line here. So this is my move to function. So then as soon as I start a function inside this component, I just have to get it out of the maybe. So I go KFM equals maybe KFM question mark. And if it did initialize properly, this will just go through. And then I'll have access to the keyframe movement component from this. So this function will take in, I made a makeshift move to function. So if you worked with props before, you already have your move to function, but this is a makeshift move to function for entities inside this component. And what it takes in is a target transform, a maybe time, and a maybe speed. So the difference with this is if you want your movement to be based on time, so you want it to go a certain distance based on time, you can input time. If not, you leave that false. And if you just want it to have a certain speed and you don't care about how much time it takes, you input the float there, and but if you don't, you leave it false. And then remove time means if you want to remove the entity after the movement is finished, you can write a number there, and it'll remove that entity after the movement is finished and that extra time. Okay, now going into what this move to function does. So the first thing is I set up the time to equal either the time or the time it take with the speed. So I'll calculate the distances. Well, actually, first of all, if both are false, it's actually just going to teleport the entity, and it's going to print missing speed or time, and that's why it teleported it instead of moving it. But if one of them are true, then it's going to go into moving the object. So first of all, I'm going to initialize a variable called delta distance, in case I'm using speed. So then I'm going to get my current transform of the entity, just nice to have. And then I'm going to do a delta transform, which uses a custom function in a second. So I'm going to get the delta transform between my current transform and my target transform. So here's my get delta transform function. You can just look at it here. You can just copy this. It should return you a delta transform. I can't explain everything because rotations are kind of weird, but yeah, this should work. And then here we're going to go into if the speed is a thing, then we're going to calculate the, we're going to set the delta distance, equal to the difference in translations dot length, which will give us the total distance. And then if we're using speed, then we're going to set the time equal to the distance divided by the speed. And if there's no speed, of course, it'll just still be set to the time. So then we're going to go get our keyframe. We're going to make a keyframe for a keyframe movement component. This is a keyframe movement delta. So what you need is a duration, an easing, and a transform, an easing function and a transform. So our duration is our time. Easing is the easing function I just defined at the start, which is just linear easing, but you could mix it up if you want to. And then the transform is the delta transform. This is important. So typically with move to functions with props, when you set a move to, you move to the new transform. But with keyframe movement, it's a keyframe movement delta. So you only need the difference. So that's why I got the delta transform, and that's going to be the difference in our transform. But this target transform is still just where you want it to be. This will calculate the delta transform. After you made the keyframed movement delta, you're going to set your keyframes equal to that one keyframe, and then you're going to also give it the playback mode, which I had defined at the start as well. And then you're going to write and kfm.play. That'll just start playing your keyframes. And then after that, you're going to have a race between, I just have a race between kfm finish event. So this will trigger when the keyframe movement is finished. Or if you have something else going on that may stop your keyframe movement, you're also going to want to race against that. And basically whichever one of these happens first, will finish the race and it'll move on. Then I just have an else statement here to print that you're missing keyframe movement if this first print statement doesn't go off. And then in case you entered a remove time, you're gonna get the remove time out of the maybe. And then if it's bigger than 0, you're gonna sleep for that amount of time. I guess even if it's, you can't sleep for a negative, so actually this is important. If it's bigger than 0, you're going to sleep for that amount of time, and then you're going to remove it. If it's not bigger than 0, you're just going to remove it right away. So then that should be all you need for the movement component using the move to, which is very nice and simple. So now this is just an example of what I did at the start. It just uses a trigger device. You could do you could do anything you want, but I'm just using a trigger device on triggered event. Get the prefab. So this is how you spawn a prefab actually. You have to mention the prefab where it is with these brackets here. So for me, it's in my prefabs and it's named p_cube. So then what I do, I just get the agent, I get the simulation entity, which is what I'll be adding my entity to. And then I'll get the real move, I'll get the generic movement component of my cube, which I had already added in the prefab, so it should always be there, right? And then I'm also just going to get the character's entity because I'm going to use the transforms. So I'm going to set my starting transform equal to my for characters entity dot get global transform. I'm going to set my cube equal to that transform, add my cube into the world by adding it to the simulation entity. And then I'm going to calculate a new transform, which is just some made up thing. I'm going to move it to the left by 100 and up by 500. And I'm also going to change the scale to double the scale. And I'm just going to keep the rotation. So now I'm going to spawn real movement comp, which is my generic movement component. Spawn that dot move to, enter in the transform I want it to go to. This will be the time. I entered an option of time here. Since I did time, I don't need speed, so I set speed to false. And then my remove time, I'm also going to want to remove it after. And this will be 2 seconds as well. And it's important that for most things, like you probably want to remove it after. If it's like part of your map that's going to stay there the whole time, yeah, you don't have to remove it after. But if you're spawning entities and you're spawning, especially if you're spawning a lot of entities, you're going to want to remove them because once they start piling up, I mean, once you get into the thousands of entities, they could start lagging the server. So then, yeah, and then you should be able to just set up your verse device as you normally would in UEFN. Just drag it out. Once it's out, drag out a trigger, hook the trigger up, and then when you're in game, it'll just work. So this is a very basic tutorial on how to just move things, right? But there's so much more you could do with this move to function. This is a very nice base function to just have in your bag, right? And then when you're cooking up something really nice, you could use a lot of move tos and use move tos different directions back and forth, you know. So yeah, I hope this helps you guys out, and feel free to like and subscribe.